Hi, it's Susan, and I'm getting into the spirit of this season, painting a Halloween house. This is a time-lapse process of my painting, and I'll take you through how I approached it. Now, I decided to approach this entire painting really wet. So right now what you're seeing is that the paper has been wet on both sides, and there's no tape because I didn't tape it down. It's because I wet both sides of the paper, and I'm just putting all of the colors down on this really wet sheet of paper, starting with the lightest first and then building up to a medium value and then getting darker and darker. And the approach here is going to be where I lifted out details, or at least that's what I thought I was going to do from the beginning, and that I would not do any masking fluid. I would just put down a bunch of paint and then start lifting out some details, because so much of this reference photo, as you can see, is dark, especially in the foreground. And some of the details are really there, but they're very subtle and they're really soft. And so I thought it was a great opportunity to try some lifting out of darks. I personally tend to not paint dark enough, and I am trying to teach myself how to do that, but I oftentimes get a little bit too scared to go too dark. So you're going to see me in this process begin lifting as if I'm done with placing the darks, but I'm actually not, because I realize later it's not dark enough, and I end up having to then cover up all of my lifting and then pretty much have to lift again. But I think this was maybe good practice. So what I'm doing here is I am trying to lift out some of the house structure that I see faintly in the photograph. Of course, there's part of me that's just making it up, and anybody can really just make up what you think is there. And I really think that that's maybe the part of this image that's the most interesting to me, is that it's that you can suggest details that you've just come up with on your own. So back to the process that I'm using here. So I have returned now to the background. So those distant trees that are sort of foggy is such a great opportunity to use wet on wet when it's fuzzy like this, because they don't quite need so much definition. So you can put in these marks with your brush, and it kind of creates this very foggy and misty feel without having to do too much. And so I pretty much am just going to leave those background trees as they are, because the focus is really on the house in the foreground with the darkness and the details. So as I go along here, I'm still lifting. And this is really, I think, just practice where for later when I have to lift again. But you can, I think, see from the time-lapse process where I'm choosing to put in the details, which I think is maybe nice for you to see here, is how abstract they are, and they don't follow the reference photo exactly, but just a little bit. So now that the paper is drying a little bit more, and I can put in these details and the darker details, and they don't bloom quite as much, it's kind of a nice opportunity to put in these darker branches and twigs and have them still be fuzzy, but not so hard edged, which I think really helps it feel a little bit more ethereal. And here's the part where I realize that I could have gone darker and I should have gone darker. And so I am repainting the entire front of the house. Now, this part I will say is, because I didn't dry the paper in between, it's one of those times where you do have to be a little bit more aware of the water to paint ratio, because if I was using too much water and I started painting on top of the background, it could really cause there to be cauliflowers that perhaps are unwanted. So it's really a judge of how much water is in your paper, how damp it is, and then how much water is in your brush. You can see some cauliflowers happening, and perhaps there's a part of me that just wanted to explore and adventure here and see what happens, because I think there's room for there to be unexpected watercolor results. And so I was kind of okay with it. I think that this is really, there's areas here where I was wondering or unsure if it was going to start bordering on overwork. Now, I think all of us are really aware of that overwork in watercolors. If we've painted long enough, that the more we push around paint on our paper while it's wet, you're going to get all these brush strokes that you might not want to see. And so then you get a little bit of overwork. And I do think that I have overworked this painting a bit. And that's okay. I think that we just have to recognize that we're learning every single time we paint, and then use it as a time to be curious and stay curious about the process. So one thing that you're seeing me do that I don't do often is scratching. And so I took a card and a palette knife and I started scratching out these details because there are branches here that you can see are lighter against the house face. And so I thought it was a good opportunity to practice scratching, especially with this moody image. I felt like there was a lot of playroom here. And I know it, seems like a very serious image, but I feel like in this image there's a lot of room for play. So now I'm doing the roof, which has quite a bit of linear details on it. So the aim here for me was to suggest that there were details and roof tiles without painting every single roof tile. So I'm going to allow the lines to kind of skip around and be broken, and then take the opportunity to paint in some of the tiles so that you can see that there are kind of shadows and shapes of the tiles there themselves, but not paint every single line and shadow. And I think suggesting texture and suggesting shapes are definitely one of those things that interests me in terms of watercolor painting. Not something that I've mastered, but something that I continue to work on and get very intrigued by. How do you take something that's detailed and simplify it in a way that it becomes abstract, yet the viewer can still put together what's going on? So now these final details are the dark branches with hopefully what I was hoping for was a bit of dry brush effect. And these details are definitely those ones that make you nervous, or they make me nervous right at the very end, because they are crossing over the entire image. You're not quite sure if it's going to turn out well. They're the darkest, they have the hardest lines, and they could in a sense make or break your image. And I think here I try really hard to tune into my gut's instinct and intuition and just let the painting kind of take me where it needs to go, because obviously I'm not painting every single branch and every single leaf. I'm a little bit guessing and making decisions on where to put these lines, and it can be a bit nerve-wracking because you're not quite sure if that one line you're placing is going to throw off your painting or not. And I think we just never know. And I think that it's important to be scared and question when we're doing it, and then learn from the process. So hopefully you had fun taking a look at my Halloween house. It is not something that I feel like completely turned out exactly the way I wanted to, but it was fun, and I think painting wet is always a good experience.